Hello, everyone. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. Thank you for joining us during your lunch break. All right, everyone, give us just one more moment while we get set up. Thank you all for joining, and we will make sure we're looking forward to Brian's presentation. All right, Brian, I think we're ready to get started. I want to welcome everyone today for joining us for our virtual Lunch and Learn series here at Improving. Every month, we take some time to focus on different uh, focus areas, practice areas, and really highlight some of the value that improving can bring to your organization. This month, we're focused on UI, UX, and we have a fantastic speaker, Brian, who's joining us today. Again, this is part of our ongoing webinar series, so join us every Wednesday here. You can sign up at improving.com. Today with us is Brian Kinnett. He joins us from our Atlanta office. Now, Brian is a graduate at Kennesaw State University in Georgia and has a focus in graphic communications. This has really led him to provide a great perspective when it comes to how we develop and how we use UI and UX in our daily life. In addition to leading design efforts for many accounts, including the North American Mission Board, Interior Logic Group, Alexander Open Source System, and the Georgia Lottery, Brian has also taken time to work with mobile apps such as or to work with mobile apps, LMS, and CRM systems. Prior to working in UI UX design and development, Brian had experience working in a very creative capacity, including in film, print, and education. So brings a wealth of knowledge in how to really enhance and increase the value that UI and UX can bring. Today, Brian's going to talk about UX team integration and how better product teams can share, or building better product teams through shared principles. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brian here in just a moment, but I do want to remind everyone that this is a presentation where you can ask questions. We're going to encourage people to ask questions in real time. So feel free to drop all of the notes into or any of your questions into the QA button at the bottom of the screen. You can also drop any notes or thoughts you have in the chats. While our attendees are automatically muted, if you would like to ask your question in real time, feel free to raise your hand and I will unmute you. Now, without further ado, let me turn it over to Brian himself to talk through his presentation. Brian, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Emily. Like you said, this is a UX presentation. This is the third part in a four-part series. We'll go over some of that, what the other ones are as well, but this one is on UX team integration, better product teams through shared principles. So like I said, the two ones before this was around UX mindset, which really set the stage for the use case for UX in general, and how it's not something that is solely or should solely be the responsibility of UX designers, but anyone involved in a product, specifically digital products. And then UX maturity, the second one, that one was discussing aspects to a more mature organization or product when it comes to how well they're focusing on customers. And then this third one today for the UX team and methods. So the reason I wanted to talk through this one, we're getting a little bit more detailed as we get into the UX topic this month. This is summed up really nicely in a book that I read a couple years back, but the reason I enjoyed this book so much was because it touched on a lot of things that I had learned since starting my career in user experience. So I started about 9 or 10 years ago. I had done similar things in, related to the industry before that, but formally a UX designer about 9 or 10 years ago. Things evolve and change. We a lot of the times tend to refer to it as digital product design now. But in general, UX, this book really helped summarize things that I had learned. So I wanted to share this out. It's a little more tactical approach to things that you could tomorrow start implementing in teams you're involved with, products you're involved with, etc. Now, also this talk, some of these principles that we're going to talk about is really not meant to be a formula like you should do X, Y, and Z. This is more of things that you should be able to pick and choose and try to experiment with and incorporate into your team. So the book we're talking about is this Lean versus Agile versus Design Thinking. It's written by this author, Jeff Godhealth. And again, the reason I'm talking through this is because it's a nice, quick read that helps organize, especially for UX designers or people who may not be super familiar with development life cycles and stuff like that. Help clarify like how to operate in these different types of teams. So we'll go over some of the three main methodologies: Agile, Lean, and Design Thinking. Quick history on some of the pros and cons to it, and then we'll get into these shared principles. So Agile, this started in the mid to late 90s. It really came out of a need of fixing some development bottlenecks, missing deadlines, issues like that. So, and specifically for software. So the issue with software still and at the time was uncertainty mostly. uncertainty and things in what customers might want, how exactly people interacted with software, changes in the economy, the complexity of software, and all of these things led to uncertainty, which led to this philosophy of the responding to change over following a plan. So that's the core of Agile. After a short cycle, which is called a sprint, typically 1 or 2 weeks, then the team essentially would pause, assess how things are going, and then respond to anything that changes. So that's at the core of what Agile is. It really should emphasize this philosophy over sticking to or following a plan or a process. And eventually, all of this led to what we could call the DevOps movement. Initially when code or applications or software was being released, it would be developed, printed onto a CD, shipped out to stores, bought by end consumers, and installed. But now we're at this point where code can be shipped multiple times a day. And what this allows is it's a much faster pace. You can roll changes back easier. You can push changes quicker. You can also get customer feedback a lot quicker. So that's one of the nice things that have come out of that. Some of the issues, although this was a good philosophy, it became difficult to deliver at scale. So when you got up, to 10 teams, 20 teams or more, maybe even 100 teams, some of the efficiency was lost. The teams would optimize locally for their own team, but when it came to communicating with other teams, it could actually cause some issues like duplicating work or maybe doing something that would be to the detriment of another team. So this is where scaled Agile framework comes in. If you're not familiar with it, safe Agile or scaled Agile framework. This is when I learned about this a couple of years ago. This was fantastic because it incorporated a lot of UX and product design into it. So a lot of good resources there. And again, like I said, when I first started doing UX 10 years ago, I had no idea what Agile was. And no one at the time, or the groups I was associated with, different clients, knew even how to do, let alone what UX was, but how to even incorporate it into this Agile development process that everyone had. So anyway, SAFe does have a lot of that in there. You can cover it. Some of the downsides to something like SAFe is it can turn Agile into a product. It can get really bloated of a process. And some other potential downfalls is you can treat the product owners, the design teams, marketing as basically support staff for the development teams or engineers. And so that potential downfalls of that is isolating team members. And Agile really is focusing on delivering code, the time it takes to get to market, and essentially velocity and efficiency. So the next one here is Lean Startup. Lean Startup is focused on not can we build it, but should we build it? It was started by Steve Blank and Eric Rees. It's really focused on treating every project like it's an experiment. And the experiment is, should you continue to build this thing, whatever this thing might be? And also, can you build a sustainable business model around it? And as the name implies, these are really started for startups. So it was meant to get a really quick feedback cycle on kind of those two main things: is should you build it, and can you build a business model around it? This is also where MVP came from, the minimal viable product. Everyone has an MVP. Clients like to refer to phase one a lot of the times is MVP, which is really not the same thing. So phase one is trying to fit as many features in as possible versus what the true sense of an MVP in lean startup should be, which is identifying what's the most important thing you need to learn first. So if you're truly implementing a minimum viable product, these are the two things that you're going to be trying to do, which is what's the most important thing you need to learn and doing the least amount of work to learn that. And that's so you can not waste time, money, etc., and learn something from what you're doing. So this is kind of some of the problems with it turning into phase one versus phase two, is because a lot of the times when a client is talking about MVP and they already have a backlog set up for what they want to do in phase two, the issue with this is that it does not, a lot of the times clients don't do the cycle, which is what did we learn? It can be similar with Agile that we never come back around to learning, which is some of the downfalls of some of these, is they want to get directly into new features and never answering some of these important questions to begin with that Lean is supposed to be trying to answer. So it's meant to help with course correction. And it's really supposed to be proof of whether or not you should continue to move forward with the product. Most of the time, I don't think I've ever been involved with an MVP or what's been labeled as an MVP for a client that the client actually will kill that feature before continuing. They've already made up their mind it's something they want or that their customers want without having any of that feedback. So what this led to is eventually led to some design thinking workshops, but you see a lot of these companies come up with these innovation labs, which was trying to solve that problem of listening to the customer and whether or not you should build something. So you ended up with these innovation labs that ultimately 90% of the time here isolated design teams from the rest of product teams, marketing, and developers. And the issue with that is that isolation and that separation is that the design team might come up with an amazing idea or concept that executives love, but sometimes it might not actually align with corporate goals. They're detached from developers who are going to implement it, and it can lead to a lot of frustration when a design team that's isolated by itself kind of separated from reality of what can be done in a certain amount of time. So this is,
Ryan, I'm
hey,
sorry to interrupt. I did have a question on the last slide. I know you mentioned the siloed nature of some of these products. Myself, coming from a product background and a project management background, I've seen this a lot. And I noticed that not only do we seem to have a lot of silos when it comes to our developers and our design teams, but we tend to not have language around develop or design when we talk about lean items or even in agility. Is that something that you see UI UX professionals becoming more ingrained with, or what are we doing to better create bridges between those two thought processes?
so that's what some of these 10 principles will get into. And the way I've seen it is it's ultimately the role of everyone. It was lack of just being aware that there were silos to begin with. A lot of people will find like, oh, this is really frustrating, but no one, reaches across and tries to bring people in. And it might even be that people don't even consider it. Like I was having a conversation with a client recently about, hey, I heard you have a customer insights team, customer care center. Do they have feedback about what customers are complaining about, et cetera? And they're like, yeah, of course they do. It's like, oh, well, we should try to talk with that team and see how we can start incorporating their feedback into our product lifecycle. And it was like, oh, yeah, that's actually a good idea. So,
Yeah.
um,
Definitely seems to be a missing part. And I find it so strange with so much of Lean's focus on reducing waste. We don't tend to include people in the conversation to have the most line of sight into what a user would consider waste. Thank you
mhm,
so much. I'll let you continue.
yeah, and thank you for the question. All right, so design thinking, this is the third one. This is the philosophy behind design thinking is, are we solving a real problem for a real customer in a meaningful way? Design thinking can be a lot of things. When I first heard about design thinking, it was in the context of, I think IBM. I might be misremembering that, but the first time I really heard it defined was a week-long, 5-day sprint. It might have even been 2 weeks the first time, but I think Google came back through and said, oh, we can do this in 5 days and then even 3 days. And point is, it can pretty much be whatever you want it to be as long as you're following some certain steps. 1990, IDEO, they didn't create design thinking, they popularized it. And they started applying it to broad strategic problems. Um, and executives were on board with this. They saw companies like Apple putting design first, design led type of language that they were using, and so everyone wanted this Appleness for their company, without really understanding what it is or how to implement it. And so a lot of times you can end up with people doing design sprints, sketches, post-it notes everywhere. And at best, you can end up with a nice shared language about a product and goals around a product and purpose for a product. But at worst, people tend to think of this as a waste of time that could have been used shipping code. So some of the things around design thinking is this is something that should be used continuously. It can be sometimes a lengthy, costly approach, but it ultimately comes down to is like, where would you rather ship something that no one wants, or would you rather spend just a little bit of time up front and incorporating some of those lean principles and design thinking focused on the customer? Because ultimately, um, the business doesn't exist without customers. So if you're not focused on solving a problem for those customers or users, then it's easy to get lost in the weeds and just focus on shipping things. So some of the other potential pitfalls is similar to what I was mentioning on lean with those innovation labs. This is kind of could turn into the same thing where you have these isolated teams not communicating with each other. Another way, customer feedback, talking to UX is great. UX should be talking with developers on some level every day. I tend to break UX into two types of roles. You've got an execution. This is like in the weeds with the developers fighting every day. And then you've got strategy, which should be talking to UX and product and business. So I'll see companies also implement design thinking once. And if they don't see some kind of significant groundbreaking result the first time, they don't do it again. And it's not meant to do that every single time. It's meant to be the cycle that you go through. So you don't lose sight of your customer. You don't lose sight of the purpose of the product you're creating in the first place. And there will be things that come up that you can learn and solve. One of the ways I have tried to get this into some of the teams I work with, especially because a lot of organizations do Agile. I bring up safe documentation, like I mentioned before, for the IP iteration or the innovation and planning sprint. This is usually the last sprint in a program increment. And this is a great time if you're a UX designer, if you're a product owner, if you're whatever role you're in, bring this up with who can make decisions about this and get it into your PI planning or in your sprint planning. but have an iteration where you can do a couple day design thinking workshop with your UX team. Developers also, and if you go to the SAFE website, it's also got all other kind of stuff you can do during this innovation and planning. But this is a great time to inject this design thinking and get a good cycle going that can be put into a calendar somewhere at a reasonable interval. So this is, maybe this diagram worked at some point, but the point of illustrating this is we've got all these different processes that different teams try to do all the time. And with everyone having their own process, you can end up with isolated teams. It can lead to confusion. Not knowing how to work together. What's the best way of doing that? Who's going to actually lead a product? And how are you going to measure whether or not it was successful? Because everyone's got different metrics. So this is where we will, for the rest of the time, really get into principles and not process. So, you might ask which process is right. Agile is focused on delivering in regular cadences. Lean is focused on what should you focus on, and design thinking is trying to answer the question, are you working on something of value? So the answer to this question is that you should really just pick and choose what works best for your team. Understanding these different ways of doing it, it has value. There's valuable components to each of these processes that you can incorporate. So you don't have to adhere to any one of these 100%. Most of the time it's never done, adhere to 100% for each one of these. But to me, that's the point. And I think the sooner you're okay with that, the better off you'll be in the long run. This is a kind of the combined of those three processes. It's a lot simpler than that example I showed a couple slides ago. And again, this isn't a prescription that needs to be done exactly this way every time. Let's say you're talking with a stakeholder, these types of explanations of the process that should be loosely followed can help organize some of these different processes and talk about it a little bit more meaningfully. All right, so we'll get into some of these different principles here. Like I said, there's 10. We'll go through each one of them. And when I get to the last two here, I've switched these because I wanted to talk about an incentive structure last. So again, not meant to be a prescription of something you should absolutely do, but these are common things between those three practices. I'm sure we're all somewhat familiar with, but it's great to have this kind of thing written on your wall, on a Post-it note, on your whiteboard, wherever. And whenever you're potentially running into an issue, you can try and do one of these. And honestly, most of the time it comes down to communicating frequently with people. So this first one, this is called working in short cycles. The reason for this one, and I think, if you're familiar at all with any of the three methodologies that we went over, then they all talk about short cycles. This drawing here is how you successfully hit a deadline. And unfortunately, a lot of products run into this, where everything is great up front, and then, oh no, deadline, sometimes arbitrary deadline, comes running up, and we've got to get everything in last minute. So the reason for this is it's really hard to do long-term product planning. Discovery work is hard to estimate. Development work is hard to estimate sometimes, and a lot of companies want to know hours and deadlines rather than complexity and pushing valuable features forward. So this is one reason for the short cycles. if your team is not familiar with this type of process, you can try it out in a short cycle. You can take 2 weeks, talk to your team, say, hey, we're going to try something. We're going to focus on, and we'll talk about retrospectives in the next one, but we're going to focus on doing X amount of work over 2 weeks. And then we're going to talk about how well that worked, and then decide if we want to continue doing that or doing something different, right? Sounds very much like Agile. As you work in these short cycles and you use evidence to help you make better decisions. You don't run the risk of spending 6 months or even a month on something and then finding out something wasn't working the whole time. That can be a costly mistake. So the shorter the cycle, obviously within reason, the better. Number 2, hold regular retrospectives. This is part of that continuous learning mindset that we see in all 3 of those methods. This is also something that I think is great for an individual as well. You should kind of have your own mini retrospective, if not daily, at least weekly. And this helps your team really understand and work better together. Teams should be smaller than larger, anywhere from 5 to 10. It's kind of a good number, but what this does is it gives a chance for communication, and evaluate the progress, how things are going. It can be uncomfortable to some people. The more you do it, the less uncomfortable it gets, and people actually look forward to it. One of the downfalls is nothing gets fixed. Something I've seen that works well is you create a backlog of things from your retrospective, but you have to start adding those things into your next sprint, or you've got to keep track of it somehow, whether you're doing sprints or not. Take the feedback, put it on the wall. If you're in the office, put it on people's desks. This is what we're working on this week, better communication or whatever, and help hold each other accountable. You can also get an outside facilitator to help with this if you need. It is an option. All right, number 3, customer at the center of everything. This is the idea that customer value equals business value. Without customers, there's no business. There's no need for products. So everything comes down to customers. You can see some large companies putting highlights on the importance of customers, obviously. Some companies aren't sure who their customers are. They might have a general idea, but they're really not that specific about it. And it's important to acknowledge there's different types of customers. You've got end users, end customers, but you also have product owners as a customer. Let's call them stakeholders, business stakeholders, executives, etc. So there are ways of tracking and mapping different customer types and providing value to them. It just comes down to what's the priority at any particular point in time. So just to list a couple internal and external return on investments on focusing on the customer, you've got things like increased user productivity, reducing errors, less training costs. You can save money from early in a development cycle. So instead of developing something users don't want, you can save money on not developing that thing if they don't want it. And then some of these things are the same for external as well. More customer support, customers talking to their friends and giving recommendations to your product, etc. So I'm going to go over a quick case study. I got this from an example I heard not too long ago, just talking about, I'm going to go back and forth between 2 slides, but Fender and Gibson. So this is just an example of how focusing on your customer can make a difference. There was a breakdown of revenue based on launch date of these two different websites for these companies, but I don't have that breakdown in front of me, but I think the story is the same regardless. Just by looking at the layouts of these pages, you can get a sense of different customers. You've got Gibson, which seems to be more professional, potentially more scary imagery. If someone's not familiar with Slash, they might not know who this is. And they've got some prices down here at the bottom that could be quite intimidating for certain people. Now, that audience, what you would think is more for, say, like professionals who do this for a living, whereas Fender, it's pretty obvious this is catering towards beginners. They've got these how-to talking about how to play chords. So the point of this is at the time these were released, Fender saw a larger increase in their customer base because they weren't scaring off their customers. More people at that time wanted to just learn how to play guitar. They weren't looking to go into it professionally. So instead of putting large price tags up front on equipment that you probably don't need as a beginner, they focused on how to learn, lessons on guitar, simpler equipment, better looking environments, stuff like that. So when you're trying to make decisions about what or how you should solve a problem, focusing on the customer can help determine how you're going to solve that problem, right? Both these companies needed a new website, let's say. But how do you design it? Whose decision is that? Well, you look at the customer, who's your largest customer, what are they asking for, what do they want, and you design towards that. So that can really help drive your decision making. Number 4 here is go and see, managing by walking around. So this is something, I believe this is spelled correctly, Gimo Walks. That's an idea that basically means get up out of your chair, go to the floor, and see how things are working. It can be, if you're not careful, it can be easy as a manager to think you know how things are going. But let's say if there's a manufacturing production line and you've got a manager in a back office and a lot of people on the floor in an assembly line, unless you are there and watching over a period of time, you're probably not familiar with how things are actually going. You can also talk to people in the team. You can amplify good patterns. So if you see, again, like if it's, you might ask your team to do things a certain way, but a week, 2 weeks, a month down the road, if they're not still doing that, but they're still productive, that's fine. You can amplify whatever they're doing that is helping them be successful. Other things like asking what's working and what's not. So this is number 4, go and see.
Hi, Brian. Just a quick question about number 4. I heard the term Gimo Walk, but I haven't used it quite as much. I'm guessing, would this be similar to tool sets like process mapping or process walkthroughs?
Yeah, so I think for more of a virtual environment, it might even be just being in a daily stand-up if you're not typically in one. Hopping in a call here and there, just like, hey, I'm here, how can I help? Having one-on-one calls, this is something, since people have been more remote recently, is having more one-on-ones.
Got it. I've actually heard some clients use the term over-the-shoulder meetings, hanging out with people just to see what they do.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Mm-hmm. And I've even some of my I'm getting older, so it's weird calling them my younger counterparts, but some of my younger friends, like they will work just on a screen share on completely different stuff, just in a meeting about nothing. They're just there working, and they want to be working with someone else next to them. And I think that's, if you have that type of relationship with the people you're working with, great. All right, so number 5, test high risk hypotheses. This is discovery first versus delivery. This slide is basically about balancing the amount of work that you've got. Eventually you do need to ship code, so you can't test everything. So this chart is meant to help you identify the things that you should be testing. You can create these hypotheses with sort of this formula. We believe this customer behavior will be achieved if these users successfully attain this benefit. So this is kind of like a formula you can use. But it basically has a hypothesis and what you think should happen. And it just better defines things. It's not, hey, we need a dashboard. It's, no, we think users will be more informed if we improve the notifications around this benefit. And you can test those, right? So you can, hopefully, if you're collecting data already, it could be analytics or like design tests before something is in code. But you can start with some type of analytics, some type of feedback, and then make a change in a sprint and ship it and see if you actually made a difference. So again, you can't test everything. So only test the things that are perceived as highly valuable, but also risky, highly risky. So that'll help you prioritize things on what you should test. I think, I can't remember if it's in a later slide, but you also don't need to, it is actually this next slide. So do less more often, number 6. This, I simplified it. I removed research. It is do less research more often, but I like do less more often. So less research more often. So especially being in UX, I thought you had to do design tests, A/B tests on hundreds of people. You don't most of the time. You get about 90% of all the feedback you would get from 100 from the first 5 people you talk to. There's reasons you might want to test larger audiences, but in the spirit of these short cycles, doing less research more often, this can be anyone in your company. It can be stakeholders. It can be developers working on another product down the hallway. It could be someone that when you go to whatever hobby you do. You can ask, hey, can you take a look at this and tell me what you think? Doing this more often, and then the important thing, broadcasting those findings immediately to the rest of your team. If you get feedback on something at night, type it up first thing in the morning and send it to everyone in your team's channel or chat or Slack or whatever. Say, hey, I just wanted to share this happened. I got 3 people, they said the exact same thing. And again, if you're considering everything you're building as an experiment, it helps with this mindset of doing less research more often and just sharing out with people. And again, if thinking about our previous slide, like what should you test, focus on those things as well with these types of tests. And that should help. All right, number 7. This is work and train as a team. I mentioned before that that should be bullet 1, 6 to 10 people. That's the ideal team number. Much more than that, people can start to hide. So this gives more accountability. It also helps with communication. What each other's doing. Who can give the yes or no on something. There's less tape to go through. And so you end up with kind of more champions if something needs to go outside the team for a decision. You also want dedicated teams that work together, ideally, in the same office or the same room. But it's not always possible. So again, there's ways of doing that. There, you've got your agile rituals that you can do, daily stand-ups, or even like I mentioned before about just working on a screen share with someone. If you're working on the same product, you probably have stuff you can relate to. Get feedback from everyone. I know designers I've seen do this, developers I've seen, product business, everyone gets feedback from their own group and not from the rest of their team. So kind of like what we mentioned before with some of these design workshops is designers will work in a silo and then share things out, and developers are like, what in the world is this? We never agreed to this. This is no way we can hit this timeline. So get the whole team's feedback when you're working on a design, share it. And I'll do this a lot. Share it with the developers before you share it with product owners or business. That can get developers on your side very quickly, and they'll love you for it. Let's see what else. Kind of already mentioned it, the having a balanced team. So well, one example, some pitfalls you can run into is business and product will talk to each other, but they don't involve UX. They should involve dev, at least the lead. But a lot of the times UX gets left out because like, oh, we're still working out, some business requirements or product requirements. And it's like, well, everyone should be focused on the customer. What I have found is UX designers, or digital product designers are for sure focused on the digital experience and customers. So a lot of the times they'll see things from a different viewpoint, different context. And that's kind of the point of this balanced team, is that everyone is approaching a problem from a different perspective. So I 9 times out of 10, if you ask a UX designer, hey, we're gonna, like if you're the product owner, hey, I'm gonna be talking with business about this new product. It's very early on in the process, but I just wanted to see if you wanted to be involved in this call and listen in. They're gonna say yes. Especially if they're more on the strategic side of product design. Number 8, radical transparency. So there are ways of doing this. Some of the rituals we mentioned from like Agile, workshops, daily stand-ups, demos are fantastic. Demos should be, I know Agile prescribes this, but it should be the same thing for your design thinking workshops, again, those cross talent silos working together, should be demoing things for each other. Developers and product do this a lot for business when they're doing Agile. But again, designers, if they're working on something that's a sprint or two ahead, they should be giving demos for upcoming work, for sure. Data is another thing. So like if you decide to stop doing something, explain it to the team why. Don't just like if you kill a feature, explain why and have it based on data. People spend a lot of time and emotions into what they're building, and if it just gets cut with no explanation, that can be rather frustrating. So make sure you're clear about what success is, that it's about the product and not whether or not a developer or UX designer or product owner was quote unquote successful, but was the product successful for the customers. Again, if you're focused on the customer and sharing that feedback, this is why we're killing it, this is why this went well, and we're going to continue iterating on it. It's better. So number 10, jump into this one, we'll go back to 9. Make learning work a first-class citizen of your backlog. The phrase here is what gets visualized gets done. This is very true. I've been in plenty of client calls where stakeholder one says something, stakeholder two says something, and everyone loses track except for themselves, right? So, stakeholder one remembers what they wanted, but two doesn't. And a lot of this needs to go through type of a discovery phase. And so what you end up or what you can end up with is a UX designer frantically writing all this stuff down, going and disappearing for a month, designing all this stuff, not talking to their developers, and then showing up with something that people are seeing for the first time. So what you should try to do is add discovery work into your backlog. Don't have two different backlogs. And I'd say that to a certain extent. Sometimes you need a delivery backlog and a discovery backlog, but you should be going over both of it. So depending on how it's physically or virtually broken down into backlogs, I will still share this stuff with the team I'm working on. So a UX designer should be part of a product team. You've got developers, product, business, UX should be in there as well. If there is a separate discovery backlog, it should be shared in the same meeting as the delivery backlog. Everyone can see it, everyone has access to it, and you can track it. And then last point here is going back to number 9, create an incentive structure. This comes down to, basically what motivates people. There's different business motivators for people. Some people are motivated by aesthetics or financial compensation or learning something new. So people have different motivators. But you can try to find a way to incentivize good behavior, right? So if, let's say your team is not communicating very well, whenever you see them communicating well, do something to strengthen that type of behavior. Maybe have a couple team lunches or whatever. But the point is, when you're seeing something that is actually improving, give something of value back that tells everyone, please continue doing this behavior. Something else I'll mention about this is around kind of the product purpose or vision. There's this client I was working on back in the day. This is brand new to my career. I've got my notepad sitting in the meeting at the client's office, ready to talk about requirements. And the executive sponsor sits down at the start of the meeting and starts talking about why we're even here to begin with. And the product we were working on was it was a web application for coordinating disaster relief for like hurricanes and whatnot. So basically helping people whose lives are potentially ruined for the moment. And so he started every single meeting we had with talking about, we are helping actual people who are in a devastating situation, and this is why we're here. And he went into more detail, but I thought it was astounding at the time to kick off a technical call with why we're even here for something, emotional like that. And that stuck with me for years. And I think it's incredibly important to get everyone on the same page. So in conclusion, try to lead with these principles. Again, pick and choose what works, amplify things that work, stop doing things that don't. Do less more often. It could be in any sense. It could be trying to change something and tweaking something a little bit more often, or stopping doing something quicker, communicating more frequently. What this does is it basically helps reduce some risk and then this is leading into our last talk about that, outcomes and leadership, but um, all of this hopefully can help you reduce risk, be more proactive in your team and less reactive. And then, like I mentioned, just improve overall communication. And Michael next week will get into how to do some of that with outcomes and leadership. And I think that puts us at right about our time. So if there's any further questions, you can reach out to me at my improving email, and I'll be happy to respond or talk more through this. So thank you very much.
Brian, thank you so much for your time. This was a fascinating topic. And as somebody who is not in the UI UX world and also not a developer, I think you highlighted a lot of places where we can better coordinate with our team members across a variety of different specialties, including UI UX. I know I will be taking away some actionable items from this talk. As you noted, next week we'll have Michael D'Onofrio speaking on outcomes and leadership, how UX can positively transform your business. And that will be the final talk in our series on UI UX month. You can join us here every week at our virtual lunch and learn talks. Sign up to learn more at improving.com. Again, thank you all for joining us on your lunch break today. And Brian, thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. Have a good day and a good week, everyone.